welcome to another edition of On the Trail of Delusion, where I try to separate the wheat from the chaff and actually give you something substantial on the JFK assassination rather than the usual nonsense you find all over the internet and on YouTube. And today my guest is Ernest Kearney, who is a playwright and somebody who has been following the JFK assassination for many, many years. So Ernest, welcome to On the Trail of Delusion.
Thank you, Fred. Glad to be here.
So how did you get interested into the JFK assassination?
A rather convoluted route, actually. I went to school stupid, and I came out of school stupid. And then one night, I'm sitting in front of the TV, your average dopey 12-year-old, and suddenly on TV, there's boobies. And I was frozen. I just locked in and I watched in rapture. It turned out to be a series, so I watched every episode of the series, and it was I, Claudius. And I became fascinated with the Romans.
Right.
And started to read everything about the Romans. And then I had to read everything about the Greeks. Then I had to read everything about the Egyptians. And it brought me into history full bloom. And I've always considered myself the poster child for the Autodidact Foundation.
Right.
I pursued a screenwriting career, and I did well. I lived off my option money for a couple of years. I was hired to write a thriller about the real assassins of JFK. Now, to that point, I had not really given the entire assassination much thought, but I had to get grounded in information to write this thriller. So I started to read the Warren Commission, and I ended up giving the producers back their money and telling them I couldn't write their stupid script. And that just became an obsession. I mean, there are certain things my friends know to walk away from. If we're ever in a social situation and somebody says, oh, an assassination killed Kennedy, or the Holocaust never happened, or everybody wrote Shakespeare except for Bill Shakespeare, the people who know me just clear the room immediately. Truth is just far too important, especially in this era that we're going through now. And I've become, I'm afraid, rabid in my approach to that. I got onto the Facebook sites after reading Linda Zagzebski's Virtues of the Mind, the study of epistemology. How do we know what truth is? How can we distinguish what a fact is? Our brains aren't really devised to do that. Our brains are devised to keep us alive. And so we react rather than think. If we hear, the Neanderthals, if they heard a twig snap behind them, didn't sit there and go, gee, I wonder if that's a saber-toothed tiger or my mate. They just jumped up and ran. We have to train ourselves to think properly. And getting into epistemology, I wanted to test myself and improve my abilities. And Linda Zagzebski says that the epistemic vices of not thinking properly are the hallmark of the conspiratorial minded. So I looked at the Facebook JFK sites and said, here's my lab.
Right. Yeah, well, it's quite a lab.
It is quite a lab. And I have to say, I have never had one interaction with any of the conspiracy tribe where it hasn't been saturated with epistemic vices, overgeneralization, inability to distinguish authority and experts, epistemic insouciance, a carelessness. They do not care about the truth. They just want to be right.
Right, yeah.
I mean,
yeah, no, you mentioned this book, Virtues of the Mind, which absolutely sounds fantastic. And you list, in one of your papers, you list around 14 of her epistemic vices. I don't know
Oh,
if I should read them out or whatever, but they're all very interesting. So the list is gullibility, closed-mindedness, lack of thoroughness and negligence, rigidity and dogmatism, prejudice, obtuseness, insensitivity to detail, denial and wishful thinking, dishonesty, hubris, laziness and carelessness, superficiality of thought, willful naivete, and misinterpreting data and statistics. It's a terrific list of vices.
and uh, I also, there's one that I think that list missed, and I'm working on a paper, which is a lack of historical consciousness. Uh, history history is the signpost to almost everything. You hear the old saying, history repeats itself. Well, that's invalid. History never repeats itself. Man just keeps making the same mistakes over and over and over again.
Right, yeah.
Uh, you know, I, another one of the epistemic vices is uh, an inab- uh, an inability to accept the imperfection of evidence. Nothing is perfect in this world, and they think because one person heard, what they thought was a gunshot from the grassy knoll, that invalidates everyone who said it came from the book depository. You read history and you find example after example of how failed conspiracies are. My favorite is the Little Princes in the Tower of London.
Hmm.
During Richard III, the Little Princes vanish, and nobody knows what happens to them. Over the years, two imposters come forward, claiming that they are the Little Princes. Both of them raise armies and are defeated. Henry VII makes one his falconer
Hmm.
and says, if you admit you're not the Little Prince, I'll make you my falconer. And he says, well, I love birds. Let's do that. Fast forward to his son's reign, Henry VIII. Thomas More, the man for all season, falls afoul of Henry VIII because he won't back his divorce from Anne Boleyn. He gets thrown into the Tower of London to await his execution. And while there, he decides to write a history of Britain. And he gets to the Little Princes. And nobody knows what happened to the Little Princes. So he turns to one of the guards and he goes, what do you think happened to the Little Princes? And the guard goes, well, everybody knows that. Richard III strangled them and buried them under that staircase over there. And Thomas More thinks that's the most ludicrous thing he's ever heard, but he puts it down in his history. Charles II, during the Restoration, is remodeling the Tower of London. They tear up the staircase and they find a chest with the skeletons of two young boys. History is very straightforward. You look at even recent history. Nixon, one of the most imperial presidencies we've had, tried to hide the fact that, well, he broke into a hotel. Couldn't do it. Ronald Reagan tried to hide the fact that he traded hostages for missiles. Couldn't do it. Clinton tried to hide the fact that, well, he had a little diligence in a linen closet. Couldn't do it. But the conspiracy-minded think that the government could assassinate the president and hide it.
Yep, and what amazes me on history. I mean, a good example is, let's say, take J. Edgar Hoover. So they tell us how J. Edgar Hoover hated the Kennedys, and yet when J. Edgar Hoover found out about Kennedy's dalliance with Giancana's girlfriend, her name was Judith Exner.
Mm-hmm.
What does he do? He could have exposed that to the world, and it would have destroyed Kennedy back then. But he goes and he meets privately with Kennedy. Says, "Hey, knock it off. This is not good." I mean, so he could have easily destroyed Kennedy with making that public. So people ignore that. Oh, Hoover hated Kennedy. He wanted him dead.
Well, it's the same thing with Dulles. Dulles was put on the commission to hide the CIA's involvement, and it's like, who who wanted him on the commission? Bobby Kennedy. He
Yeah,
wanted him on the commission to hide something, and that was his and his brother's efforts to kill Castro.
and
You
and
know,
the other thing I find funny is that, I mean, that's so true, but also the fact is that, people say, oh, the CIA hid from the Warren Commission the plots to kill Castro, but hold it, Bobby Kennedy didn't tell them. He could have told them, but Bobby Kennedy kept his mouth shut because he knew that he was implicated in that.
and it all comes out in the wash with the House Select Committee on Assassinations. It all comes out. I mean, the most successful conspiracy, to my mind, in American history, Grover Cleveland's cancer surgery.
That's a good one. Yeah, I read that in your paper.
In his second term, he developed cancer of the jaw. And this was when cancer was like, AIDS during the 70s and 80s, the great fear of the nation. And we were in an economic depression. And they thought if this news comes out, it's just going to be worse for the economy. So they made a cover story. He's going fishing with a friend. They snuck 7 doctors aboard a ship. Uh, he had a big fanfare in front of reporters the next day going aboard. They conducted the operation through his mouth, so there was no scars and they didn't have to cut his sideburns. And then he had the cover story of, well, I'm going to go hunting with a friend.
Hmm.
And they kept that secret for 27 years. One reporter got wind of it and reported it, and they went out of their way to, like, no, 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 no. And finally, when everybody was dead, the last doctor came out and said, yeah, we did it.
It's a
And
really
I
good
think,
story. And my story like that is sometimes I'm asked on Facebook, well, do you believe in conspiracies at all? And I say, well, yes, Al Qaeda conspired to bring down the World Trade Center. Yeah, oh, no, no, we don't, no, no, that's we don't like that one. I said, well, the Japanese conspired to bomb Pearl Harbor. Oh, no, 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 that's not what we're talking about. And
and it amazes me because, 3 years before 9/11, the Filipino police broke an Al Qaeda plan to load up to hijack 11 passenger jets, to have biological material on them, and to explode them over American cities.
right.
You know, I mean, it's part of our lack of imagination when it comes to our enemies. I mean, they're looking for somebody, coming on with a suitcase with an atomic bomb or something very elaborate. They're not looking for 16 guys coming on a jet with paper cutters.
Yeah, yeah. No, for
You know,
sure. So one of the first ways I came about you was I found on the web you had written a review of Max Good's film on the Paines, or Ruth Payne
yes,
in particular. And it was just a terrific, you wrote a really terrific review. And in
thank
fact,
you.
I said, I have to keep this for posterity's sake because it's just one of those iconic essays. So do you want to talk a bit about the Max Good documentary or your view of that or.
Ruth Payne is perhaps one of the few noble figures to come out of the entire conspiracy kerfunkle. I mean, she has been upright, straightforward. Her story has never shifted. She has told it to everyone. I mean, she told it to Good and was just slightly disappointed, in the film. I mean, part of the epistemic vices, their thoroughness. Ruth Payne got Oswald the job at the book depository. No, she didn't. She all she did was she made one phone call to Truly and found out that there was an opening.
Yeah.
And that was at the assistance of Oswald's wife. Oswald called to make the appointment. Truly hired him, decided which of the 2 warehouses he was going to work in, and all a month before anybody even thought about JFK going to Texas.
That's right.
And it just that complete oblivion and the slander, just the slander of this woman for being a good Quaker, for wanting to help somebody, you know. And when she passed, and you had all of these, entries on Facebook, oh, good, she's going to burn in hell. I just went ballistic. I
Yeah.
mean, her and Robert Oswald, I think, are the only ones who come out of the entire assassination saga that can hold their heads up a little.
Yeah, what amazed me about, well, Max Good, I mean, he didn't, you would expect somebody to do a little bit of research. And before you just ask the questions and see what, can you not make your own determination whether this is nonsense? I mean, the real story, as you say about Ruth Payne, was that she was a really nice person, a great woman who did a lot of nice, who was just nice. And she's been slandered. That's the story, the slander of
Yes.
Ruth Payne. That's the story, and Max Good missed it. And I don't know if you remember, there's a scene in the movie where Ruth Payne goes to Nicaragua. She wants to
Oh,
help poor people. She goes down there, and somebody recognizes her and said, "Oh my God, you're that woman from the CIA," and just starts mouthing off. And Ruth had to go back home. She had to leave
I,
Nicaragua because they made her life miserable.
that woman, I can't recall her name, but I don't know if there is a hell or not. But if there is, there's a special room and a special bowl waiting for her.
Yep.
Um, but it's like with the Warren Commission, accusing the Warren Commission of duplicity and, being part of this vile conspiracy. Earl Warren? When I was raised in the South, I remember as a child going by billboards that said, Warren, hang that N-word lover.
Right.
I mean, he did more for civil rights than any other Supreme Court justice. He gave us the Miranda rulings. Uh, he brought down all the laws against interracial marriage. Uh, he was when he was the most popular governor California ever had. He was so popular that both the Democrats and the Republicans wanted to nominate him. You know, and then like Clark. Clark. I mean, liberal capital L. Who wanted to impeach George W. Bush. This is a man who is going to, side up with a right wing conspiracy. These people have no idea. You know.
No, and it's just so amazing that Earl Warren and all the Warren commissioners and staff to think that they would conspire against the truth,
Yes.
that they would somehow subvert the truth to present something false to the American people. All of them? I mean, come on, this doesn't. It's just too fantastic to believe.
And let's face it. If any one of the junior lawyers had gotten a sniff that there was something afoul, oh man, he would have made a career out of it.
Yeah, you
But
would have, any lawyer who would have found a conspiracy or a conspiracy among the commissioners to keep the truth from the public. Oh my God, that would make your name, and it's such slander. It's just so ridiculous.
and the spokesman, Mark Lane. Oh my goodness, the man who thought Jim Jones was another Martin Luther King. It's just amazing. Um, Lately, on the Facebook sites, I encounter these people about reclaiming history, and so far it's a 6-0. These people come up and they go, "Oh, it's a terrible book," and I go, "Fine, it's a terrible book. Tell me what you didn't like about it." And they give me the same list of 8 flaws, none of which are applicable. It does an incomplete job of investigation. It's 1,600 pages with 900 pages of footnotes.
Yeah.
Where do you get incomplete anywhere there? I tell them whether they support the assassination theories or not, reclaiming history, I think, takes the nomination of the encyclopedia of the assassination.
It sure
Yeah.
does. I mean, it is an astounding book, and I am so. In fact, I not only bought it in hardcover, I had to buy it in Kindle so I could search it more easily. Because it's just such an incredible resource.
You
Um,
know, I had a friend, we were talking, and he also read it, and he said, "Have you read the footnotes?" And I went, "Well, I've read some of the footnotes." And he goes, "No, you have to read all the footnotes. It's another book."
yeah, it is. I mean,
And
when I was debunking Oliver Stone's documentary series, JFK Revisited, so I would take, like, for instance, he did a little thing about the way JFK's brain weighed too much. It had to be a different brain. And I went to Reclaiming History, and I said, I don't think Vince would write about this at all, but I'll search. And lo and behold, there's two
yeah,
pages about the controversy over the weight of the brain, right there, debunked, right there. I mean, it was amazing.
it is an amazing read. Every single one of the conspiracy folks who said they read it and hated it, after I've challenged them, and I go, shame on you. You can believe a lie, don't be the lie.
Right.
I never have any contact with them again. They just vanish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And Mark Lane. I mean, I just can't believe how I'll post stuff about Mark Lane on Facebook, and all of a sudden people will go ballistic. Oh my God, I love Mark Lane. Oh, he's so fantastic. He's so great. I mean, he was the charlatan of the first order.
it would be nice if there could be an annotated rush to judgment, but but they won't allow that because the publisher, that's meat and potatoes to them. Uh, but it's just laughable. The amount of, Eric Hoffer, who we've talked about. Are you? Have you mentioned you were reading the True
Yep,
Believer?
it's still on my list here. I bought it. It's sitting there. It's definitely going to be. I have to read it before I finish my next book because it's going to have some important stuff. But you want to introduce the book and talk a bit about it?
Eric Hoffer was a fascinating individual. He was orphaned during the Great Depression at around 13, 14. He just started traveling. He became an itinerant farmhand and a longshoresman. At one point, he landed in Los Angeles, uh, and he spent 2 years in the county library reading everything. He found Montaigne's essays, and that became his Bible. And at one point, he sort of realized, there's got to be an easier way to make a living rather than farm picking. I think I'll become a philosopher. He wrote the True Believer, which is a very thin little volume, in 1951. Sent it to a publisher, immediately published, recognized immediately as a classic. Eisenhower quotes it in his industrial military complex speech, and eventually, Eric Hoffer gets to stop being a farm picker and becomes a teacher at Stanford. Uh, it is it is an amazing book on just what it takes to become a true believer. And his theory is the true believers are interchangeable. Doesn't matter the ism, Nazism, communism, you know, Catholicism, whatever. The true believer just needs something to grasp onto, like a grounding person. It becomes their driftwood, and once they have hold of it, it's fierce. And it doesn't. One of my favorite quotes is, "It's amazing the amount of unbelief that goes into a belief."
Yeah, that's a very good quote.
And you see it in the conspiracy tribe. It is their belief is a substitution for a massive sense of lack of self-esteem. This makes me important. This makes me somebody. I have a truth that you don't know. I know something. I'm special. And it's impossible to take that, to let them release that. It becomes a religion.
Yep.
I mean, for you and I am sure that if new evidence came up that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was a conspiracy, we would go, oh, I was wrong. And immediately start going, yep, there was a conspiracy. Oh, what do you know?
Yeah, exactly.
That's because our opinions are not a belief. We don't believe in our opinions. We believe in the truth. And that's what's important.
Yeah, I remember when I was believing it, when I was a teenager believing in conspiracy, I was walking around, I guess, with a bit of a chip on my shoulder. Hey, I know about the JFK assassination. I know this, and let me tell you about the JFK assassination. It's so important understanding everything, and some of my friends were like, "What are you talking about?"
Well, I mean, and going back to epistemology, um, the virtues, epistemic virtues, humility, realizing you could be wrong,
Yeah,
uh, epistemic integrity, working to find the truth. Truth isn't just something you find lying in a road. Truth isn't something you pick up and parrot. Truth is something you have to grab hold of and investigate. Otherwise you're a fraud, and I don't want to be a fraud.
right. Yes. Let's go to Jim Garrison and Oliver Stone and the movie JFK. I mean, that's the ultimate in how horrible you can get.
It's frustrating how many people think JFK is a documentary instead of just a masterpiece of BS. One scene I always call upon is uh, the climactic conclusion in the courtroom. Kevin Costner is up there as Jim Garrison. He does that speech and he's looking out at the audience. You see his wife, Sissy Spacek, sitting in the courtroom, and he goes, "Okay, you have to decide." And then Stone does that revolving shot, that overhead revolving shot that just pans over the judge, pans the ceiling, pans back into the courtroom, and suddenly Garrison, his wife, are in different clothes. They're sitting, she is sitting behind him at the prosecution desk. They have their son with him. Obviously, time has passed. Doesn't tell you how much time has passed, but time has passed, and it hides the fact that the jury was out for 45 minutes.
Right.
I mean, they were gone long enough to order coffee, pick a foreman, take one vote, and go, "Oh, guilty. Let's go."
Actually, they would have been faster, but they all had to pee. It's true. It's
And I mean, just the mendacity of the film. You want to get smoke from the grassy knoll. Well, they go from the uh, uh, Mancarno to a shotgun. They can't get smoke, so they build a billow.
right.
And, oh my. Uh, and it's interesting. I mentioned to you that I believe that those of us who dismiss the conspiracy theories, we're the majority. We're the majority. I mean, you always have the conspiracy people ballyhooing about 61% of the country believe there was a conspiracy. Well, that's an aggregate. The Pew Research Society did a wonderful breakdown. Of that 61%, you have 10% who says it was the mob.
Right.
You have 2% who says it was the Soviet Union. The largest percentage is 38 who says it was the government. But 10% says it was the CIA. 2% says it was LBJ. 1% says it was the FBI. 1% says it was the Secret Service. 1% says it was the military industrial complex, Oliver Stone's villain of choice. The largest solid percentage is 20% who says, yes, there was a conspiracy, but we don't know who or what or anything.
Right.
So the largest body are people who go, yes, but we don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas those of us in the 40%, we all agree, no conspiracy, Oswald did it. We're the majority.
Absolutely, we are the majority, and it's we are the one theory that is embraced by more people than anybody and any other theory.
Yeah.
It's just so true. Um, and I
I
think
mean,
also that the tide is turning because we now have a variety of really good books out there, not just Bugliosi's, but Posner's and other books, and also we could fight back now on Facebook. There's pushback to the
yes.
conspiracy theorists. They never had pushback in the 1960s and 70s, or very little pushback.
And I think a majority of the 60%, they're conspiracy tourists. It's just herd mentality. They think, well, there must be a conspiracy. Everybody thinks there's a conspiracy.
Yep.
Give me 15 minutes alone in a room with any of those, and I can either change them or really bend them. Just because they don't know the facts, they don't know the details, and it is amazing. I mean, none of us like to be wrong, but you cannot you cannot have an emotional involvement with your beliefs, your information. You have to approach everything cognitively. I mean, I would still love to believe there was a Santa Claus, but
Yeah.
he's never answered any of my letters.
He
And I'm
hasn't? Oh
still
my God.
waiting for that pony.
You have the wrong address. That's the problem. The other thing I would say really bothers me is that, some would say it's a harmless plaything to deal with conspiracy, but in fact, over the years, a number of people have been really harmed by the conspiracy theorists, from Ruth Payne to Clay Shaw to Carlos Quiroga and Carlos Bringuer, Kerry Thornley. There's a long list of people who have been really hurt by conspiracy theorists. And
Clay Shaw was crucified on the conspiracy theory. He was, I'm sure, American grotesque. He was an honorable man. He was a man who cared about his community. He was a man who fought in a war. He was a mensch.
yeah, yeah, he was the great
And
word.
Garrison, who was, I'm sorry, a bottom feeder, just made it his life to destroy him and prove the homosexual gay killing. Oh my. Um,
And then
and
and then for
I'll
Oliver
go, I'll go.
Stone
Oh
to,
yes,
to do the same thing, to victimize him again.
despicable. And I'll go farther. For my money, the mire we are in today with fake news and the attack on expertiseism had its seeds with the Kennedy conspiracy. I mean, for my money, it goes right across. And this is what happens when you allow foolishness to take root in a society. When you have a disbelief in values and traditions and our institutions, this is what happens. We end up in chaos. And I've always been curious how many of the people on Facebook who are conspiracy fans are like, Trump supporters. Uh, and I'd really be curious to find out, okay, so you believe in the Kennedy conspiracy. What about 9/11? What about contrails? What about Area 51? What about what about the Yeti? You know, I
Yeah,
mean, I
yeah.
was
Well, look at when Edward J. Epstein went to Sylvia Maher's apartment for that famous meeting in 1965. He wandered over to look at her bookshelf, and there's all these books on flying saucers, and his heart just sunk. Like, oh my God, who am I? What am I dealing with? And I'll tell you, Dick Russell.
no,
He wrote the book "The Man Who Knew Too Much" about Richard Case Nagel.
okay.
Well, Dick Russell, I mean, it's a ridiculous book, and I've spent a lot of time debunking Richard Case Nagel. Well, Dick Russell wrote Rob Reiner's podcast that he did a
Oh
couple of
my.
years ago, which was horrible. But Dick Russell has a Substack right now that users could subscribe to, and it's all about UFOs. And that's all he writes about is it's just, oh my God.
Do you know how I am absolutely convinced there is intelligent life in the universe? They haven't contacted us.
Do you know Anna Paulina Luna? The
Yes.
woman who's been holding those hearings. I mean,
Yeah.
she goes on Joe Rogan's show and she starts talking about biologics. Oh, the government is hiding all this biologics, this life form from outer space. They're hiding it from us. It's going to come out. It's going to come out soon. And he goes and he asks her, "Did you ever look for the Holy Grail?" And she says, we found the Holy Grail. Don't you know? The CIA found the Holy Grail using remote viewing in the 1980s.
Oh my.
And you go back and you look, and in fact, the CIA did some experiments with remote viewing. They had a guy sitting in an office, and they asked him, "Where is the Holy Grail?" And he says, or no, the Ark of the Covenant, where is it? And he says, "Oh, I see a room in the Middle East somewhere." And the CIA realized this is all nonsense, but not to Luna. Oh no, we found the Ark of the Covenant.
Well, it's like Robert Kennedy Jr. the other day talking about the high meat diet that will cure schizophrenia, and the Harvard report by a doctor, I think he said Polis. Well, there is no Dr. Polis at Harvard, and the closest they could come was a Dr. Pollard, who did write about uh, schizophrenia. Never, he said, never in any of my writings do I use the word cure. Uh, and all he wrote was, it seems that high protein diets have an effect on a minimal aspect of the schizophrenic population, and there should be more investigation. But to Robert Kennedy Jr., that's a cure.
Did you see his comment a few weeks ago about germs?
No.
RFK Jr. said, "Well, I'm not afraid of germs. I used to snort cocaine off the toilet seats."
Did you read Tom Nichols' The Death of Expertise?
Yes, yes.
Brilliant piece. And I think he might be right. This is Donald Trump's payback to America for not electing him in 2020. I am just going to put the stupidest people in the world in my cabinet and screw all the rest of you.
Yeah. I mean, it really is astounding.
People always, when you talk about conspiracies, they go, "You have far too much faith in your government." And I go, "No, I don't actually. There's a part of me that would really like to think that my government could orchestrate this elaborate assassination and keep it secret for 61 years. There's a part of me that would like to think they were that efficient. I know better, you know. I mean, it's just it is just but I agree with you. I think the tide is is turning. I was working on a play that would be essentially a clown show about the conspiracy theories. Like just, so you believe the magic bullet, do you? Well, I mean, because some of it just becomes so ludicrous. I mean, Garrison, how many shooters does Garrison put in the Plaza? 16?
It changes every time he talked. I mean, you have no, it would always change. I mean, my God, there was a shot from the sewer, from the storm drain.
That's my favorite.
Yeah.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite. And the gun was hidden in Jackie's pillbox hat.
Yeah, well, I love the story of how Garrison got to the whole storm drain thing. This is where basically Jim Garrison sent Steve Jaffe over here back in 1967, 68 to come here and took pictures and basically trying to say that you could get down into the storm drain and then head over to the sewer over there on Elm Street, and that's where some shots were taken. And there's a very famous picture of Steve Jaffe heading down into this sewer. It's one of the sillier Garrison theories, but basically it was Al Chapman who started it. He went to Garrison, told him about the sewer shot, and the next week Garrison was putting out a press release saying the shots came from the sewer.
A lack of awareness of reality. I was raised with firearms. I'm all for gun legislation, but I'm not afraid of guns. If I were king of the forest, I would take away every handgun in the country and replace it with a shotgun. Because that's going back to the founders' reason for the Second Amendment, something to blow the heads off politicians. I had a friend in Vietnam. He was a tunnel rat. Go down into these little tunnels that the guerrillas, that went on for miles. He had a flashlight and a 45. And he went down one and he's going, and the flashlight's off because they only turned it on when they turned the corner. And he turns it on, turns the corner, and there's a VC with a rifle pointing right at him. And the VC fires. And they both stand there looking at each other because my buddy isn't hit. Well, my buddy did what he had to do. He crawls out of the tunnel, he gets up, and he notices two small streams of blood coming out of his chest. He takes off his shirt. The VC's bullet hit his sternum, traveled under his skin, over his rib cage, jumped over his spine, came around the other side of his rib cage, and popped out.
Wow.
That's how weird bullets are. Bullets are strange things. Too much movie.
2 nights ago, we did a panel discussion that I'll be putting up soon on the single bullet theory. And so we were talking a lot about, how bullets react. I don't know if you've seen the Discovery Channel recreation of the single bullet theory. They did everything they could to recreate the single bullet theory, and the bullet comes out looking almost like 399. Yeah. And what people don't understand is it doesn't have to come out exact. It has to come out close enough that you could say this theory is possible. It's either impossible or it's possible because you can't recreate the single bullet theory. It's the same thing with all these idiots who Oswald didn't have enough time to go from the rooming house to where Tippett was killed. Well, the fact is you can walk the walk yourself, but you don't know how fast Oswald was walking or running. You don't know his route. All you can do is it possible to get there in time? I did it in like 11 and a half minutes. It was definitely possible. I was over 60 years old when I did it, So, the same thing with Oswald running down from the 6th floor to the lunchroom. Could you do it in 90 seconds? Well, if you do it in 92 seconds, it's close enough. And people don't understand that, it's just remarkable how the conspiracy folks it's very, very frustrating.
Over the last 2 years arguing with them, they just keep arguing the same points over and over again. They keep reinventing the wheel over and over again. They're impervious to information.
Yeah, and in fact, when I first started on Facebook, I'd argue the single bullet theory with somebody, and the argument might go on for a week, and then it would end, and then somebody else would start the same argument.
Yeah.
And that's why I started doing all these blog posts, like, did David Ferry know Lee Harvey Oswald? Well, rather than argue it, I'll just do a blog post and I'll put up the link anytime somebody says they knew each other. Here's the link. Go read the truth. And I'm going to stay out of the argument. And that's what I do, because it's I don't want to do this every day of my life, the same
Yeah.
argument
But
over and over again.
they're not going to read anything.
That's true. They won't read it. They'll refuse to go. God forbid they should go to my website. It would be, it's like haram to Muslims. I mean, you can't go to Fred Litwin's website. Um, did you hear what happened last year at Lancer?
Mm.
2 years ago, I was invited to go. I got myself invited to speak at Lancer, and I gave a presentation on the Stasi file of Richard Case Nagel. I actually got his file from the German government, which showed that he was crazy. And so I got invited to speak, and there was a boycott. They were like, how
Oh
dare
my.
how dare they have Fred Litwin speak? It's horrible. Don't go. Boycott it. So very few people showed up to my talk. And this year I asked the organizers if I could speak again. I wanted to speak about some of my research on whether Oswald was in Clinton, with Clay Shaw. And they said, okay, good. That's a good topic. And then all of a sudden, feedback came in and they had to rescind their
Oh
invitation to
my.
me because they were afraid of financial ruin.
Typical. Typical. I mean, you know what? There are aspects that I think really need to be explored more. When Oswald was in the Marines, he was court-martialed for
Yeah,
having a unauthorized weapon. He
yeah.
shot himself in the wrist, I believe, but he represented himself at the court martial, and he got they still found him guilty, but he got his punishment lessened. And I think that had a momentous impact on Oswald. People say, well, if he was innocent, why didn't he declare that when he was in custody with the Dallas police? Because he wanted to get into the courtroom, because he wanted to have this captive audience who could then see what a genius he was, and he would just fix the whole world. He wanted that moment. I mean, going back to history again, if John Brown had died at Harper's Ferry, I think it probably still would have been a civil war, but it would have been maybe a decade later. What made John Brown was his courtroom appearance. That's when John Brown became John Brown.
Hmm.
Same with Hitler, It, you know, the the beer marks didn't do jack. It was just the failure. Once he got into court, he became a national celebrity.
Hmm.
And I think that's what Oswald envisioned for himself. I am going to get into court and I'm going to have a captive audience. You know,
Yeah, and the funny part is when you see people talking about mock trials, the one thing they always miss about a mock trial is that we don't know how Oswald would have wanted his defense attorney to act. He might have wanted a political show trial,
yeah.
which would have been very different from trying to say, oh, chain of custody wasn't proper. I don't think Oswald would have that much interest in, oh, the chain of custody was slightly off. You can't find your initials on that cartridge, so I'm innocent.
And just his entire demeanor in custody. I mean, if you or I or any normal human being had been arrested for murdering a police officer and the president, well, when they took us past the reporters, we probably would have been screaming a lot rather than throwing the Marxist salute, you
That's
know.
right. Absolutely. So tell me, just I want to end up this interview. Where do we go from here? What should people do? And do you have any other? Tell us, yeah, if you want to tell us more about this terrific book that Linda wrote that I want to pick up. But how do people get more educated on this?
You know, uh, I say, first off, read The True Believer by Eric Hoffer.
Yep.
It's a thin little volume. You can knock it off in a weekend, even if it doesn't change your views on the assassination. it will give you an appreciation of individuals. Just a few of his quotes. Every extreme attitude is a flight from the self. Far more crucial than what we know or do not know is what we do not want to know.
Right.
Confidence is ignorance. If you are feeling cocky, it's because you don't know something. His philosophy was so beautifully grounded in his knowledge of the common man. That, I think, True Believer is a great book. Death of a President by Manchester, just straightforward. Then if you're going to get into heavy duty stuff, yes, Virtues of the Mind, man. It is an amazing read. It's a challenge. It's very difficult to apply what she wants. It's like an exercise regime. You have to keep working at it.
Right.
And once again, reclaiming history. You don't change your views on the assassination. Believe that 14 hobos did it. It doesn't matter. Reclaiming history is the encyclopedia of the assassination.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for appearing on the Trail of Delusion.
Fred, it was a complete honor. Thank you for asking me.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.